Hey guys, Sebastian here from Potzer Analytics. Today we're going to be doing an intro to opposition. This is a fundamental endgame technique that is really useful for players to know starting in the 800 to 1000 rating range and starts to become really powerful for players to apply in their games starting in the 1000 to 1200 rating range. There's a lot to learn, so let's jump right in. Opposition took me a really long time to figure out and really understand. So today, before we define opposition, I just want to play this little mini game to see the power of opposition, and then we'll define what it is later. So here in our little mini game, we have only the kings on the board. All the other rules still apply, but white needs to get his king to f8, g8, or h8. So white just needs to get his king onto one of the three squares that have a circle on it, and black just needs to stop white from doing that. So all other chess rules apply, but white is trying to get his king to f8, g8, or h8, and black is trying to stop him. So what we see here is that if white makes a really natural seeming first move, so if black moves king b2 directly towards his target, this is actually a blunder, and it allows black to take the opposition by playing king b8. And we're going to talk more about what opposition really is, but let's just see what happens here. So as white approaches his target, black can stay in front of him, and now that the kings have met each other, it's white's move. White has to just go over, and black is able to stay in front of the white king as white tries to go around him, and white can't make any progress. So here, white has failed in achieving his goal. So let's go back to the beginning of this position, and let's see how white could have won this minigame by playing a different first move. So if instead white had played king a2, he would have won this minigame. Reason is white takes the opposition by playing king a2, and we'll see how this makes a difference as the kings come closer together. So let's just move forward a few moves. So now the kings have met each other, but this time it's black to move, and that makes a big difference as white tries to go around the king. So let's just play it out a little further. So now both kings are directly in front of white's target, but this is black to move. So black has to go to one side, which is going to allow white to go to the other side. So if black moves king f6, now white can go in the opposite direction and go king h5. And if black tries to square up again and stop the white king, king g7, white can go right in front of him, and again, black is forced with making this decision on going to one side, which allows white to go in the other side. So if black goes king h7, white can go king f6. Now he's making slow progress towards his goal. And once again, white takes the opposition here, and white has achieved his goal. So let's see how white used the principle of opposition to win this little mini game. So let's take a look at this position here. Opposition is a situation where there are only king moves left on the board. So maybe there are some frozen pawns on the board and only king moves are left. And here this is basic opposition, where the kings are on the same file or they're on the same rank, and there is an odd number of squares in between the two kings. So here there's one square in between the two kings. And the player who needs to move, the player whose turn it is at a disadvantage, because they need to move to one side. So the player who does not need to move is at an advantage and is said to have the opposition. So in this position, it's black to move, therefore white has the opposition. And if black goes to one side, then white can choose to stay right in front of him. And once again, it's black to move, so white maintains the opposition. And if black goes backwards, white can choose to stay right in front of him. So opposition can be used defensively to stay in front of the other king. Also, if the king goes to one side, white can choose to go to the opposite side and take the space that black gave up. So white can go king c5, which is maneuvering around the other king. So opposition can be used offensively also to force the king to go to one side and take the opposite side. So opposition can be used defensively and offensively. There are 5 types of opposition. So if we go back to the beginning of this position, this is known as basic opposition or close range opposition, where the kings are on the same file or they're on the same rank and there is one square in between the 2 kings. So this is basic opposition. Opposition also occurs in diagonal. So here we have diagonal opposition, where the kings are on the same diagonal and there is one square in between them. So this is the same as close range opposition, where it's black to move, therefore white has the opposition. And if the kings walk around each other, we'll see that they reach the exact same position as close range opposition. So again, black to move, white has the opposition. Opposition also occurs at long range. So here we have the 2 kings on the same file, and there's 5 squares between the 2 kings. So there's an odd number of squares between the 2 kings. Long range opposition is easy to tell because they're on the same color square. And this is the type of opposition that we used in the mini game, where white took long range opposition. And if we walk the kings in closer, we see that this is the same as our basic opposition. So here we have black to move, so white has long range opposition. And if we walk them in closer, we see it's the same as our close range opposition, where black to move, white has the opposition. Similarly, there's long range diagonal opposition. So here we have the kings on the same diagonal, and there's an odd number of squares between the 2 kings. So there's 3 squares between the 2 kings. This is a little bit trickier to tell because the kings are already on the same color square, so you have to count the number of squares in between them to be able to tell whether or not you have opposition. So this position is black to move, therefore white has the opposition. And if they move in closer, we see that white has close range diagonal opposition. So this is the same. And the last type of opposition is called rectangular opposition. So rectangular opposition is when the 2 kings form a rectangle and there's an odd number of squares both along the file and along the rank. So here there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 squares between the 2 kings along the file, and there is along the rank 1 square in between the 2 kings. So there must be an odd number of squares in both directions for this to be rectangular opposition. So here we have black to move, therefore white has the opposition. And if we walk the kings in closer, we'll see that this is again the same as our direct opposition. So here we have black to move, therefore white has the opposition. So if I go all the way back to the beginning, rectangular opposition is the trickiest to identify because you have to count the number of squares in both directions. So both along the file and along the rank, there must be an odd number of squares between the 2 kings. This position is black to move. Does white have the opposition? So here we have a rectangle, and between the 2 kings, there are 4 squares along the file, and there are 2 squares along the rank. So there's an even number between the 2 squares. Therefore, white does not have the opposition. And actually, this allows black to take the opposition. So if black plays king d6, black takes rectangular opposition. And if white chooses to move to f3, black can keep the opposition. Now he has diagonal opposition, and now black has our basic opposition. The last type of situation I want to point out is when there are other moves on the board. So remember that opposition only occurs when there are only king moves left on the board. So here we have black has an extra pawn on h6. That gives him an extra move. So in this position, it's black to move, and if there were no other pieces on the board, white would have the opposition. So if the king moves to e6, white can stay right in front of him, king e4, but because black has an extra pawn to move, he can take that opposition away from white. So if black pushes his pawn to h5, he's now flipped it back on white where white needs to move, and now black has the opposition. So if white moves king e4, the black king can stay in front of him. So those are all our types of opposition. Now let's go to another pop quiz here. In this position, it is white to move. It's pretty obvious that white does not have the opposition, but the question is, which moves will give white the opposition? So white has 8 squares where he could potentially move his king. So of these 8 moves, which moves will allow white to take the opposition? So try to figure out which moves give white the opposition. So first, if you said king c4, good job. This is our basic direct opposition. Also, king c2, this gives white long-range opposition. And king e4, this gives white diagonal opposition. Also, king e2 gives white rectangular opposition. So good job if you said c4, e4, e2, or c2. All these moves give white the opposition. However, if you said king c3, this does not give white the opposition. Similarly, king d4 does not give white the opposition, or king e3, or king d2. So, good job if you said c4, e4, e2, or c2. Okay, I know that this is a lot of theory, but how is this actually useful in a game? So let's look at a position where we can actually use this principle of opposition in a real game. So here we have the pawns are frozen and there are only king moves left, and it is black to move. The question is, how does black win this game? This game is a win for black if he plays it correctly. So go ahead, try to figure out, if you were black, what would you do in this position? If you said king a4, good job. King a4 gives black the opposition. And let's see how this is an advantage for black in this position. So now we have white to move, and if white tries to keep black out of the pawns by moving b2, black can keep his opposition by playing king b4, and white tries to stay close to his pawns, but now you see he's given up space that allows black to go around the king. So now black plays king a3, white moves closer to his pawns, black again keeps his opposition, and you see white has no choice but to lose his pawns. And if we go all the way back to the beginning of this position, all of that was only possible because black chose to take the opposition from the very beginning. So let's see if black had played a different move. If instead, maybe black got a little bit too excited and decided to shoot directly towards the pawns. Notice that this does not give black the opposition. So how does this actually play out in the situation here? So if black plays king b4, this is actually a blunder and will result in a draw, but let's see exactly why this is a draw. So black plays king b4, and this allows white to take the opposition with king b2. Now black can't make any progress moving forward around the white king. So black is forced to play king a4, and now white can just stay right in front of him. And black can't make any progress. Even if black goes backwards, white can just stay right in front of him. And if black tries to take back the opposition, still white can block him from getting in. So it was super important at the very beginning of this that black took the opposition when he had the opportunity. So he needed to take the opposition now, otherwise white would take the opposition and black would have no chance of winning this game. So that is our intro to opposition. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I know it's a lot to wrap your head around. It took me a really long time to figure out and truly understand the power of opposition. So if you don't get it at first, don't feel bad. I highly recommend you play that mini game at the beginning with your friend and trick them with your newfound knowledge of opposition. Like and subscribe to get free access to all of our lessons on Lichess, and I will see you guys in our next lesson.